Howdy, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing all right.
Can't complain, huh?
Can't wait for this short week to be over.
It's short? Oh, right. Wait, we weren't on Monday, right?
I mean,
unfortunately, it's not short on the other end too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh man, I totally forgot that it doesn't even feel like the same week as Monday.
Right? It feels like a completely different time.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey. I'm just updating the project board status right now. But we can probably start just a little bit. If you haven't already, please be sure to add your name to the attendees list and anything you want to talk about in the agenda. We'll just get started once I fill this out. Okay.
I'm approving your PRs, Tyler. That's what I'm doing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as you may have noticed, I was quickly scrambling to get them up right before this. So yeah, they're pretty straightforward. Cool. Let me see if I can get the attendees list and just double check that we're meeting quorum here for 6. Yeah, I think that's pretty standard for us. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's jump into it. Welcome everyone for joining. If you are just joining, please make sure you add your names to the attendees list. Any agenda items you want to talk about, let's add them here, and then I'll also give some time at the end just to ad hoc talk about things. But yeah, jumping in, pretty quick overview, I think, of the project boards. It's mostly in just maintenance mode. I just added some remove the deprecated package or deprecated function types right before the meeting as cleanup before we actually get the standard or the next RC or a stable release out would include these. I think also we probably want to include the fix that Anthony submitted to adjust the map or adjust attributes that can be map keys as well. Retroactively might, I think that's part of the project. But otherwise, this looks pretty straightforward. Things are moving across the board as Josh approves things. But otherwise, like the only open ones are deprecation packages. So those should be pretty quick, easy to go. And if you didn't catch it last Friday, Anthony was able to get the release of Open Telemetry go out. RC3, it's looking really good. Definitely, I think there's like 1 or 2 minor bugs that came in, but yeah, I'm super excited about this. I think we're on the cusp of getting a stable release out. That being said,
packages were released this morning as well. If you didn't notice.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That was my next.
Took slightly longer to get those ready because of the metric test changes, but thank you, Josh, for helping get that across the line.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks a bunch for everyone just getting that across the line. Yeah, super exciting, making progress. Cool. I think with that, we can jump into the agenda, unless somebody else wanted to talk about some of the project board ideas here. I guess I did pause on that one. Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping maybe give it a week or 2 and then we can start this project to get some feedback. I'm actually working on some other things right now, so I don't have the time to really get into this, but I would like to, I think, let it soak and see if we can get some organic feedback before we explicitly ask, I think is kind of my goal here. But other than that, I think this is it. Like there's nothing else I think blocking us from stable release as is known now. Cool. Awesome. So jumping into the agenda, I had just an idea I wanted to kind of run by other people. And it's a very loose proposal, and maybe even some it's a contrarian proposal, just to garner some opinions. But I was thinking about the instrumentation guidelines that we have in the contrib repository. For those, I don't know, everyone on the call has seen the contrib repository. It's got a lot of stale PRs that are just sitting there for a lot of instrumentation that I think some people wanted or organically asked for, but it's kind of become a backlog. And I've been thinking about this a little bit more from a bigger picture perspective, which is easy to lose the details in. So, this is just a proposal. But the idea is if we have such a hard time actually approving and getting instrumentation in with the current, group of people that are on this call, most of who are the active participants in this community, it seems like a really unfathomable idea to try to maintain all this instrumentation. And I guess it's just like, how do we provide some sort of strategy to handle that? I think in the long term, just to make sure that any user of this instrumentation is going to be happy, as well as if they find issues, coming across, hopefully like security issues are dealt with really fast, but even performance or just usability issues, like having some sort of feedback to like interact with some sort of development community for each part of the instrumentation. Right now, I don't think that exists, especially a lot of the instrumentation was submitted by people who are no longer in this project or no longer a part of like Open Telemetry. So it's tough to, have this group of developers come by and essentially relearn the instrumentation every single time. That being said, like there's definitely some core instrumentation there that I think that all of us may have some familiarity to, so this may not be 100% applicable. But with a lot of that like problem space in mind, I was kind of thinking that we should make some sort of proposal, probably in the contribution docs for the contrib library, saying that we would recommend instrumentation be built in this order, and that would be that it's native to any package that you're instrumenting. Ideally, if you're the owner of that package or you're the owner of whatever you're trying to submit instrumentation for, you would just natively do that. I know there's an example of this for a Redis client that was submitted last summer, not by the authors, but by AWS interns. They, instead of submitting instrumentation to the contrib repo, submitted it to directly to the package, which caused them some churn because they tried to put some metrics in there and it wasn't 100% stable in the metric side of things. I'm sorry, in the tracing side of things. But as we go to make a stable release, I don't think that that's a blocker anymore. Hopefully, if we're doing our job well. So I would say that we try to recommend that as best we can. The next is hosting it by the maintainer. And a great example of this is the instrumentation produced by XAM, who is probably going to watch this later on. So thanks again for the database instrumentation that you're hosting. And I think that's a really successful package that you're seeing a lot of users use. And I think that that's a really good example of having them host it at the same time also means that XAM maintains it. And from what I've seen, does a really good job maintaining it, as XAM has a vested interest in that instrumentation. And I think that if it was in the contrib repo, XAM probably would still be maintaining it, as I think that they would, find some ownership on it. But I think this is a really good organic way to try to say, like, if you have really good instrumentation for this one-off bespoke library, a good example would be to maintain it yourself. And we have a place where it can be discovered, and that's the OpenTelemetry.io registry, which I think is, if we try to move users and direct users towards this registry, it'll become more useful, I think is kind of the problem that exists right now. It is not that usable. Pretty much everything listed here for instrumentation is in the contrib repo itself, which I think is a shortcoming, because I think this is, we were looking at this last time, there's over 400 and something dependencies on the main repo. A lot of them, I imagine, are going to be instrumentation that should be listed here. And if that's the case, we can start directing users here. The discoverability for other side projects, I think, is a really good thing if we try to prioritize that. So I think that's kind of like what I would propose being the second option. And then the third option, as far as I can see, would be to host it in the contrib repo. I thought, if there's some sort of internal company instrumentation that, maybe a company doesn't want to host themselves, but would like open to be in open telemetry, or if there's some sort of licensing issues, maybe that's a really good reason to have it in the contrib repo. But essentially what that is doing is it adds a burden onto all of us, and we aren't able to develop the rest of open telemetry when we're maintaining instrumentation, which I don't think is a problem if we, had 10 times the number of developers, but we don't. And the amount of development activity that I have seen in the project, it's hard for me to think that we could actually support everything. So that's been 6 minutes straight of me talking. So I'm just going to pause on that one and see if there's other ideas here.
Hey, I had a couple of other examples I wanted to cite for cases where I faced this kind of registry idea. One of them is for some reason there's this proliferation of JWT libraries, right? So there's that site, I think it's jwt.io, that publishes a registry of such packages where you can select which language you're interested in. And if I remember it correctly, it's been a couple of years since I looked at it. I think that it JWT. I look at libraries at the top. Yeah, so they kind of rate them by their, I don't know, features and conformance, which is really useful when you're scrolling through here. If there's some aspect of this standard that's important to you, you can very quickly disavow or disregard a library that hasn't conformed. So I've found this to be useful when I was in this business. Another one, I'm pretty sure there's a registry for SQL libraries, for like database libraries for Go. I'm trying to remember where I found that, but similarly it says, like to what degree they conform. So the thing that I'd be skeptical of with looking through our registry is I want to know, does the library use the semantic conventions correctly? It can be very frustrating to grab some library, say that, instrumented an HTTP client, and it turns out that it has its own idea of which attributes to use when there's opportunities to use one of the semantic conventions. Another one might be at what dependency level, which version is it brought up to if it's maintained independently. I know right now, you guys are doing some heroic work trying to upgrade all of the things in the contrib repo to match whatever the latest release is. One thing that I think is really hard with a broad contrib repo is kind of like what you see with these Helm chart repositories, where you go and you look at the issues, or you go and look at the releases, and you're in this kind of flattened soup. It's really hard to find, I'm interested in, God forbid, the Helm chart for XYZ. How do I just narrow down and find that? Even though it has a distinguished directory tree in the repository, the issues, the pull requests, the releases, they usually are not segregated in a way that's easy to find. So I find I lose a lot of time dealing with, like usually GitHub hosted repositories that are like that kind of grab bag of maintenance. There's a few of them in the Kubernetes project that come to mind. So to the degree that that we can avoid that, I think pushing things out of the contrib repo or just not accepting more stuff is probably the way to go, because I just don't see how it's tenable to think that we can drag along an ever-growing set of stuff that might not be maintained by the people who wrote it originally. Every time there's a release, you've got more and more stuff to comb through to figure out what needs to be updated. Sorry, and if there was a registry that was able to assess some of those things automatically, I know I'm inventing infrastructure here, but users would just be able to see like, oh, this library is 6 releases behind. Clearly it's been abandoned. It's fallen out of the ratings somehow.
So I like that idea. That could be its own project in general, of like having a registry that tracks a lot of that automatically. What I would recommend us do is kind of create a path to get to the different things. Like, what does a project need to do to satisfy our requirements to be able to include it in contrib? And maybe we need to set it a little bit higher than we have, where there's really nowhere else for it to go, or there's promised like there's support that has been available, and yeah, that's not going to be incredibly, that's not going to be there forever, but we can at least then start saying like, hey, this is the person who was contributing to it, and we don't, like, collectively, we don't all have time to support every single instrumentation, but you can go chase after them, and maybe they can lead you to somebody who actively can maintain it.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I'd echo, like, that's kind of exactly the problem I'm trying to highlight. Both of you kind of touched on, just like developer resources, as well as just like, is the bar, I think currently the bar is way too low. Well, actually, I don't think there is a bar. I think is also another problem. That's kind of why I'm getting this proposal up, is because like people, there's really nothing saying like when should you be submitting proposals or instrumentation, or even how to submit requests for instrumentation to the contrib repo. So guidance there, I think, would be ideal. I still think that we want to try to make sure that that bar that we're defining is at the appropriate levels. I think is critical.
I think one concern I have with how we're currently structured is that people are creating pull requests and submitting them to the contrib repo, but we're not accepting them. And thus that instrumentation sits there in a pull request and isn't usable because it isn't living in some other repo somewhere else where people can just refer to it and use it. Like we eventually said XAMPP should do with the DB SQL instrumentation. No, there we were saying we weren't ready to accept any one DB SQL instrumentation, but I think for a lot of the instrumentations that are currently outstanding, maybe we should simply say, we're not ready to accept instrumentation into contrib at all for a while. Please go host this somewhere else, link it in the registry, and we can reassess at a later date if it should be folded into contrib or if it should continue to live on externally as it does. But as long as we can make it easy for users to find the instrumentation that does exist, I think we can serve the same purpose that we're trying to serve in contrib by hosting it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's exactly what I want to do. I want to create documentation saying like, here's the barrier, here we're not going in, and then going for that, like that's definitely the goal. I do think it's actually worse than what you're saying though, Anthony, is because people were actually using the branch of XSAM for that PR, even though it like wasn't in main, and it was like even more confusing at that point. Rich, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just looking around at two things. The collector contrib repo has a nice how to contribute thing with steps you follow, and it has to have, maybe this sort of coverage and has to pass these tests. And if it breaks any tests, you're out completely. We're just turning you off immediately. I think that's great to have the how-to, but I do like your idea of having the contributors actually host it themselves. That's pretty great, because you can be quickly overcome by maintenance. The other thing I was looking at was the Java team they have their own approvers and maintainers for their contrib repo. It looks almost like a separate project. That seems like the other way of doing it, right? Instead of leaving it to the responsibility of the developer, we're just going to take care of it. We're going to have our own team. It's going to last forever. No one will ever leave, and it's going to be great. Those are two different approaches. It's probably worth talking to them about that to see what their experience has been with both of those.
So what I would suggest if we go down, honestly, either route, is say, here is the path to get into the contrib. Like maybe it start with host it somewhere else on GitHub and generate some community interest in that it's worthwhile preserving with the rest of the code. And maybe as part of the requirements are like, there is a volunteer, at least initially, to shepherd the maintenance of it. And like that could help alleviate some of this problem.
Yeah, I think that's actually touching on kind of a good point I wanted to say. I think it's in the back of my mind, but like the proposal as it's written here has the potential for having another kind of problem, and that is to have a very large number of instrumentation for the same package, and maybe some overlap. Another thing, yes, Steve was mentioning other registries. The one that really stuck out to me was Puppet. I remember back in the day, like that, the Puppet Forge had like tons and tons of packages for Puppet, and most of them were just forks of themselves. Like, oh, I want this one feature, so I'm going to fork this, and then it's like the same thing. So all of a sudden you had like, 20, 50, 100 different things for like these really small libraries. And so like, I think that could be confusing, especially as a new user, when you come there and you're like, what's the instrumentation I should use for net HTTP? And you get like 500 things returned to you. Like, that's not ideal either. But I think that's a good point. Like, that's the point when like the things that kind of Aaron's talking about, where like, okay, there's justification. This should be in the contrib. There's 500 different things here. Like, we should have a standard one that we recommend from the OTel community at that point. But like, when there's one, like, go host it yourself, right? And like, if it's really successful and then there's contention as to which one you should be actually using, I think that's something that we could address at that point. Is kind of my perspective on that.
I think one other thing to consider is that right now, I believe a chunk of the burden of maintaining code in contrib is dealing with the breaking changes that we're introducing. We're at a point where we're vastly reducing the breaking changes we're introducing with traces, but we're ramping up with metrics, right? We're breaking that more frequently. And as we add more instrumentation that uses metrics, the workload there is going to increase. So perhaps saying we're going to pause on accepting new things into contrib for now until we have stability through traces and metrics and logs. And then at that point, we can look at what the community has coalesced around in terms of instrumentation for libraries, or where there is a feature split that we think that having something in contrib could provide a place for everything to coalesce around a single implementation of instrumentation could be useful. And then we don't have the burden of dealing with the instability of an experimental baseline that we're working against. At that point, we just have to worry about security updates and updates for features.
Yeah, agreed. That's a really good point as well. Okay. Don't see any other hands. I'm cycling through video right now, see everybody's waving at me. And they're not. But I think we've kind of touched on some things. What I'm hearing from this, and I was going to take it as an action item, is to create an issue to build this proposal into docs for the contrib repo, and then eventually turn that into a PR itself. Unless there's some other feedback that people wanted, or there's outright saying, I haven't heard from anybody saying like this is a really bad idea either. If there's anybody on the call, I would love to hear about that, because I don't think that we should only have a choir of voices all saying the same thing. Yeah, okay, cool. That sounds good. I'll take it as an action item, and we can move on. Okay, Josh, I'm gonna hand it over to you, talking about the metrics SDK next PR steps.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I don't often use these headphones.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder that I have this fairly heavyweight PR that I made every effort to keep minimal as possible and readable. So it's fairly mechanical. And just to say that I think this is the best way to make the progress we need, and I'd appreciate a review as you have time to do so. When this gets closer, I will begin working on another PR to continue reforming the SDK to get closer to the current specification. Though, as you see, the current thing is we've been moving things into this SDK API directory. So it's just further consolidation will come after this. And it's not urgent for me, but I'd like to keep going as quickly as time permits. That's all.
Great. Yeah, thanks again for putting this together. Sorry, it's been a delay on this. It's my list is ever growing. I got to make sure I prioritize things correctly. Yeah, thanks again.
And also, I'm happy to help with other work as needed to help this project move forward, which is why I jumped on the Go Contrib stuff. And please, if I can help, let me know.
Awesome. Josh, have you ever designed logging solutions?
Yeah. Oh God. I think you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I know.
I did once.
Okay.
You don't want to use that code.
What's funny is my old 20% project at Google is still my favorite logging solution for Go, but I don't have access to it. And I actually petitioned, or I'm trying to petition over and over again. One day I will succeed to get that out. Hopelessly complicated, never mind.
I know, right? That's actually really funny that I'm sure there's millions that you could use, and the one that you actually want to use is locked away from you. But yeah. Cool. All right, so that's everything for the agenda that's on our doc. If anybody else has something else they wanted to talk about, please jump in.
User stories.
Moving on to user stories. Yeah, which is actually one of my favorite parts. If anybody has any great user stories or use case stories, I'd love to prioritize. We can hear about them. I see a lot of head shaking. I see some maybes in there. I'm guessing those maybes are going to turn into next week. You have some really good stories is what I'm just going to take away from that. Okay, cool. Well, I think that's everything that I wanted to touch on for the agenda. If you have some time, definitely take a look at Josh's PR. If you have some more time, try to do some really cool things and then report back to us, and maybe get some bugs or some issues with the RC out. But otherwise, I think we could probably end it early unless there's anything outstanding. Once, twice, 3 times the charm. Okay, everyone, we'll see you all virtually or next week's meeting. Bye.
Thank you, Tyler. Bye.